If someone had told me a year ago that Caleb would be asleep on my couch, I would have assumed I'd been drugged. If they told me he would be the last person to leave my party, a party I never even wanted to have, I would have checked them for a fever. And if they had described the quiet way he was breathing now, a soft rhythm in the blue pre-dawn light, I would have told them they had the wrong person. Completely and utterly the wrong person. Because Caleb was not a man of quiet moments. He was a creature of noise, of laughter that boomed across rooms, of backslapping camaraderie that I could only ever watch from the safety of the periphery. He was the sun, and I was a planet in a different, much dimmer solar system. My life was built on routine. A fortress of solitude constructed from stacks of books, the scent of old paper, and the predictable click of my apartment door locking behind me at 7 o'clock every evening. I was a researcher, a professional hermit who translated obscure historical texts. My world was small, contained, and safe. I liked it that way, or I convinced myself that I did. Solitude was a choice, a comfortable blanket I had pulled over my head so long ago I'd forgotten what the sun felt like. Caleb was Sarah's friend, not mine. He was part of the extended universe of her social circle, a bright, loud star I would occasionally be forced to orbit during birthday dinners or holiday gatherings. He was a contractor, a man who built things with his hands. His palms were calloused, his forearms were a roadmap of faint scars and tan muscle, and he moved with a physical confidence that I found both terrifying and mesmerizing. He was everything I was not, grounded, boisterous, effortlessly social. When he was in a room, he owned it. He didn't walk, he strode. He didn't talk, he held court. People, men and women alike, were drawn to him, caught in his gravitational pull. And I, from my quiet corner, would watch. I observed him the way I observed my historical subjects, with a detached, analytical curiosity that was a complete and total lie. There was nothing detached about the way my stomach hollowed out when he laughed, or the way my breath would catch when his eyes, the color of moss after a rainstorm, would happen to skim past me without ever really seeing me. To him, I was just Leo, Sarah's quiet friend, the book guy, scenery. The distance between us was not just physical. It was a chasm, a canyon carved by our opposing natures. He lived in the world of tangible things, of sawdust and sweat and solid structures. I lived in the world of ghosts, of dead languages, and the rustle of turning pages. The idea of our worlds colliding was absurd. Impossible. Then Sarah decided I was lonely. "You need to have a party, Leo," she'd said, cornering me in my own kitchen a month ago. "A housewarming. You've lived here for 2 years. It's pathetic." I had protested, of course. Parties were my personal hell. The small talk, the forced smiles, the crushing anxiety of being perceived. But Sarah was a force of nature, and she argued that my new custom-built bookshelves, the one thing in my apartment I was truly proud of, deserve an audience. Her logic was flawed and manipulative, and it worked perfectly. So the party happened. An external event, a disruption I could not control. It was a small gathering, mostly Sarah's friends, because my own could be counted on one hand with fingers to spare. And he came. Caleb came. He filled the doorway when he arrived, bringing the cold night air in with him, his presence immediately shrinking my carefully curated space. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture so casually friendly it felt like a brand. "Great place, man," he boomed, his voice too big for the room. My heart had hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. For 3 hours, I was a ghost at my own party. I refilled bowls of chips, pointed people toward the bathroom, and tried to look like I was having a good time. I watched Caleb from across the room, a knot of longing and resentment tightening in my gut. He was in his element, a beer in one hand, gesturing with the other, telling some story that had a small crowd captivated. He never once looked my way. It was exactly what I expected. It was exactly what I dreaded. The night began to fray at the edges. People started leaving in pairs and small groups, their goodbyes loud and slurred. I collected empty bottles, the clinking of glass a countdown to the moment I could reclaim my silence. Soon, it was just Sarah, her boyfriend, and Caleb left, lingering on the sofa. "We should head out," Sarah said, stretching. Leo, you look dead on your feet, I was. The social energy I had stockpiled for weeks was gone, leaving me feeling hollowed out and raw. I can help clean up, Caleb offered, his voice quieter now. The booming quality was gone, replaced by a lower, slightly rougher timbre. Don't be silly, Sarah said, waving a dismissive hand. Leo's got it. We'll see you Saturday, right? Yeah, Saturday, he agreed, but his eyes were roaming my bookshelves, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. Sarah and her boyfriend left, a flurry of coats and kisses at the door. I closed it behind them, leaning my forehead against the cool wood, the silence I've been craving finally descending. It was a relief so profound it was almost painful. There really something. I jumped, my heart lurching into my throat. I had completely forgotten. He was still here. Caleb was still in my living room. I turned around, my carefully constructed composure shattering. He was standing by the bookshelves, running a finger along the spine of a worn copy of the Odyssey. The shelves, he clarified, his back still mostly to me. The joinery is perfect. Dovetail joints. You don't see that much anymore. I stared at him. Of all the things I expected him to say, a comment on the carpentry of my shelves was not one of them. I thank you. I had them custom-made. He finally turned to face me, and in the softer light of my apartment, with the loud party guests gone, he looked different. The confident, larger-than-life persona had receded, leaving someone who looked tired. There was a weariness in his eyes I'd never seen before, faint lines of exhaustion etched around them. I could see a tiny, silvery scar bisecting his left eyebrow, a detail I'd never been close enough to notice. You should have called me, he said, a hint of a smile touching his lips. I could have done this for you. Probably for half the price. I didn't know you did that kind of work. I managed, my voice sounding thin. I build things, he said with a shrug, as if that explained everything. He started gathering empty glasses from the coffee table, stacking them with an economy of movement that was surprisingly graceful. I moved to help him, my hands clumsy and uncertain. You don't have to do that, I said, reaching for a glass he was about to pick up. I can get in the morning. Our fingers brushed. It was nothing. A flicker of contact, skin against skin, for less than a second. But for me, it was a lightning strike. A jolt of pure, unadulterated heat shot up my arm, straight to my chest, where it exploded. My breath hitched. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. He had to have felt it. He had to know. My entire nervous system was screaming. He paused, the glass still on the table, but he didn't look at me. A flush crept up his neck. Or maybe I was imagining it. I was probably imagining it. I was an expert at imagining things. It's no trouble, he said, his voice a little strained. He picked up the glass and carried it, along with the others, into my small kitchen. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, my fingers tingling. Panic, hot and sharp, was rising in my throat. He's just being polite. He's going to leave now. This is the part where he says good night and walks out the door, and I can finally breathe again. But he didn't leave. He started rinsing the glasses in the sink, the sound of running water filling the silence. I was trapped in a strange state of suspended animation. Watching this man I barely knew, this man I'd secretly watched for years, performing a mundane domestic task in my kitchen, as if he belonged there. The power dynamic, the one where he was the sun and I was the distant, unnoticed satellite, was shifting. He was in my space, being helpful, being quiet. He had shown a flicker of vulnerability in his weariness, an unexpected area of expertise in his knowledge of joinery. And I, the host, the owner of this quiet space, felt like the intruder. I forced my legs to move, walking into the kitchen and leaning against the doorframe. Really, Caleb, you can go. I'm sure you're tired. He turned off the water, drying his hands on a dish towel. His hands. I couldn't stop looking at his hands. They were big, capable. The kind of hands that could fix anything, build anything. The kind of hands I imagined could be surprisingly gentle. I'm not in any hurry, he said, his gaze finally meeting mine. It was direct, steady, and it felt like being pinned to the wall. My anxiety spiked. I was a terrible host. I was making him feel obligated to stay. Do you want a coffee? Or water? I offered, desperate to fill the silence, to do something normal. Water would be great. I moved past him to the cupboard, my body rigid, hyper-aware of the inches between us. The air was thick with unspoken things. The smell of stale beer and salty snacks was overlaid with something else, something that was just him. A clean, woodsy scent like cedar and soap. It was intoxicating. It was terrifying. I handed him a glass of water, my hand shaking slightly. He took it, his fingers brushing mine again. This time it was intentional, gentle, a confirmation. My heart did a frantic, painful somersault. He held my gaze as he took a sip, his throat working. The sound was incredibly intimate in the quiet of my apartment. He set the glass down on the counter. "I hate parties," he said, the admission so quiet I almost missed it. I blinked. "But you're so good at them." The words were out before I could stop them. A humorless laugh escaped him. "It's a performance." A really exhausting 1 inch, he leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms over his broad chest. He looked caged, out of place, and yet more himself than I had ever seen him. "I saw you tonight, in the corner. You looked like you were counting the seconds until everyone left." He saw me. The thought was a shock to my system. He had actually seen me. "I'm not a party person," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "Me neither," he said. "So what are we both doing here?" The question hung in the air between us. My kitchen, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a crucible, a place where things were being tested, melted down to their essential elements. It was just the two of us now, stripped of our social masks. He wasn't the boisterous life of the party, and I wasn't just the wallpaper. We were two men who didn't want to be at a party, who were now standing in a dimly lit kitchen, the rest of the world having fallen away. "Sarah can be very persuasive," I finally said, trying for a light tone and failing miserably. "Tell me about it." He pushed off the counter and took a step toward me. My entire body tensed. Every alarm bell in my head was screaming. This is dangerous. This is unknown territory. Retreat. But my feet were rooted to the floor. He stopped in front of me, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I had to tilt my head back slightly to look at him. He was even bigger up close. A mountain of a man who could probably crush me without a second thought. But his eyes were not intimidating. They were filled with a raw, aching vulnerability that mirrored my own. He was just as scared as I was. "Leo," he said, his voice a low rumble. He said my name like it was a question, like it was a word he was tasting for the first time. And then the confession. Not a grand declaration, but something small and broken and utterly honest. "I only came tonight because I hoped you'd be here," he whispered. The world tilted on its axis. The floor fell away from my feet. It couldn't be true. It was a joke, a misunderstanding. My brain scrambled for a logical explanation, for a way to file this information into a category that made sense. It found none. My heart, however, my stupid, frantic, traitorous heart, simply believed him. It stopped its panicked hammering and began to beat with a slow, heavy, hopeful rhythm. "Why?" The word was a puff of air. "Because I spend all my time watching you when you're not looking," he admitted, his gaze dropping to my lips. "And I'm tired of watching." He was closing the distance, moving with an agonizing slowness. It gave me every opportunity to step back, to put up a hand to say no. I did none of those things. I was paralyzed by a hope so fierce it burned away all my fear. This couldn't be real. And yet, his hand came up, not to grab me, but to gently cup my jaw. His thumb stroked my cheek, a feather-light touch over the stubble there. His skin was calloused, just as I'd imagined, but the touch was unbelievably soft. He was asking a question without words. "Is this okay?" I leaned into his touch, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement that was the bravest thing I had ever done in my life. It was my answer. Yes. His eyes fluttered shut for a second, a look of profound relief washing over his face. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss like in the movies. It was slow, tentative, a soft pressure of his lips against mine. It was a question, a discovery, a conversation. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft. I could taste the beer he'd been drinking, but underneath it, there was just him. He tasted of hope. I brought my own trembling hands up to rest on his chest. I could feel the solid muscle beneath his shirt, the steady, heavy beat of his heart. It was racing as fast as mine. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding and kissed him back, pouring every ounce of my silent, years-long longing into that one small movement. He deepened the kiss then, a soft groan rumbling in his chest. One of his hands moved from my jaw to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me there. It wasn't a kiss of conquest. It was a kiss of homecoming, of two people who had been circling each other from a distance, finally finding their way into the same orbit. It was the most honest thing I had ever experienced. We broke apart, both of us breathless. We just stood there in the middle of my kitchen, foreheads resting against each other. His breathing was ragged. Mine was non-existent. "Okay," he breathed out. "That was okay. I echoed, my voice thick. It was the understatement of the century. It was world-altering. It was the beginning and end of everything. He didn't leave that night. We didn't talk much more. Words felt clumsy and inadequate after that. We moved to the couch, a silent, mutual agreement. He took one side, and I took the other, a respectable distance between us. But then his hand found mine in the space between the cushions, his fingers lacing with mine, a firm, warm anchor in the disorienting sea of my emotions. We just sat there, in the dark, holding hands, listening to the sounds of the city settling down outside my window. Sometime in the early hours, we fell asleep, my head eventually finding its way to his shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around me. For the first time in my adult life, I did not feel alone in my solitude. My fortress had been breached, and I had never felt safer. The morning came too soon, a knife of pale gray light cutting through my blinds. I blinked, disoriented. The apartment was cold. The space next to me on the couch was empty. Panic, cold and immediate, seized me. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering against my ribs with a sick, frantic rhythm. "Caleb!" Silence. The silence I usually craved was now a physical weight, pressing down on me, suffocating me. It was the wrong kind of silence. It was an absence. I scrambled off the couch, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. The living room was empty, the ghosts of last night's party mingling with the stark morning light. A crushing sense of dread pooled in my stomach, a thick, oily slick of fear. I walked into the kitchen. It was clean, too clean. The glasses he had washed were sitting in the drying rack, gleaming. And on the counter, next to my coffee maker, was a small, folded piece of paper torn from my own notepad. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely pick it up. My blood was roaring in my ears. I unfolded it. Had to go. See, that was it. For words. No explanation. No phone number. No, I'll call you, just a blunt, brutal dismissal. The warmth of the previous night evaporated, leaving behind an Arctic chill. The hope that had bloomed in my chest shriveled and died, turning to ash. It was a mistake. The thought screamed through my head. He was drunk. He was lonely. It was a moment of weakness, and now, in the sober light of day, he regrets it. He's disgusted. He's embarrassed. My own self-loathing rose up to meet the fear, a familiar, toxic cocktail. Of course he had run. Why wouldn't he? I was the quiet, awkward bookworm. He was... Caleb. This was a joke. A cosmic punchline. I had allowed myself one night, just a few hours of impossible hope, and the universe was now correcting its error with brutal efficiency. I sank onto a kitchen chair, the note crumpled in my fist. My stomach was full of angry bees. I felt pathetic, naive, a fool who had mistaken a moment of pity or drunken curiosity for something real. The memory of the kiss, so tender and real just hours ago, now felt like a violation. A lie. He had taken something from me, a fragile, hidden part of myself that I had offered up, and he had discarded it like trash on his way out the door. The next 24 hours were a special kind of hell. My apartment, my safe haven, felt tainted. His phantom presence was everywhere. The indent on the couch cushion where he had slept. The scent of him that lingered in the air, a ghost I couldn't exorcise. I tried to work, to lose myself in the familiar comfort of my texts, but the words swam before my eyes, meaningless squiggles on a page. The silence I had once cultivated as a shield now felt like a prison sentence. Every creak of the floorboards in the apartment above, every siren in the distance made me jump, my heart leaping with a stupid, desperate hope that it was him coming back to explain. He never came. The second day was worse. The sharp, acute pain had dulled into a heavy, persistent ache. The self-recrimination was relentless. I replayed every moment in my head, searching for the sign I had missed, the point where I had misread everything. The way he'd looked at my bookshelves? Just a professional curiosity. The way he'd said he hated parties? A common complaint. The kiss? A drunken mistake. The evidence was overwhelming. I was an idiot. I avoided my phone, terrified of what I might see, or rather, what I wouldn't. No text. No missed call. I broke my own rule and checked my social media, a masochistic impulse I couldn't control. There he was, tagged in a photo Sarah had posted, grinning at a bar with friends. He looked fine, happy, unscathed, while I was here, falling apart in the ruins of my own quiet life. The solitude was no longer a comfort. It was a confirmation of my own unlovability. The fortress walls were back up, higher and thicker than ever, but this time I was the prisoner, not the king. On the evening of the second day, I gave up. I ordered a pizza I had no intention of eating and put on a movie I had no intention of watching. I was resigning myself to the new reality. The brief, beautiful aberration was over. My life would go back to what it was before. Quiet, empty, safe. The word safe now tasted like ash in my mouth. I had tasted something else, something dangerous and alive, and the memory of it would haunt me forever. Then a knock on the door. It was sharp, hesitant, not the confident rap of a delivery person. My heart stopped. It couldn't be. It was my neighbor, probably complaining about the TV. It was a mistake. I didn't move. Another knock, louder this time, more urgent. My body moved without my permission. I was floating, disconnected from my own limbs as I walked to the door. I looked through the peephole. It was him, Caleb. He stood in the hallway, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent light. He looked terrible, worse than I felt. His hair was a mess. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he was wearing the same clothes he'd had on 2 nights ago. He wasn't the confident sun god from the party. He was a storm-wrecked ship, lost and battered. He was just a man, a scared man. My anger, my hurt, my self-pity, it all evaporated, replaced by a sudden, fierce wave of concern. I opened the door. He just stared at me for a long moment, his moss-green eyes filled with a world of pain and regret. He looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. Maybe he hadn't. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough, as if he hadn't used it in a while. I stepped back, holding the door open. He walked inside, and the apartment immediately felt smaller again, but this time it wasn't intimidating. It was just full. He stopped in the middle of the living room, not looking at me, just looking at the space. At the couch. "I'm an idiot," he said, the words a quiet explosion in the room. I closed the door, my hand still on the knob. My heart was beating a slow, cautious rhythm. Your note was a little brief. It was the most sarcastic thing I had ever said in my life. He finally turned to look at me, and the raw vulnerability on his face stole my breath. "I panicked," he said. "Leo, I woke up, and you were asleep on my shoulder, and it felt more real than anything I have ever felt in my entire life. And it terrified me." He took a step toward me. I held my ground. "I've spent my whole life being what everyone expects me to be," he continued, his voice cracking. "The fun guy, the tough guy, the guy who dates pretty girls and never gets serious. It's a costume. And with you in here, it was the first time I felt like I could take it off. And the second the sun came up, I got scared. I thought I was tricking you, that I was going to ruin your life, that I wasn't good enough for this kind of quiet. My carefully constructed walls, the ones I had just spent 2 days reinforcing, crumbled to dust. His internal conflict, his fear, it wasn't about me being unworthy. It was about him feeling unworthy. The thought was so staggering, so completely outside the realm of what I had imagined, that I couldn't speak. I drove around for 2 days, he confessed, running a hand through his messy hair. I just drove. I tried to convince myself to stay away, that it was better for you if I just disappeared, that I was just confused. But I'm not confused. I'm just a coward, Caleb. I finally managed to say, my voice thick with emotion. I am so sorry, he said, his eyes pleading. I'm sorry for leaving. I'm sorry for that stupid note. I'm sorry for making you feel whatever I made you feel. It was cruel. I didn't mean for it to be. He was standing in front of me now, so close I could see the exhaustion in every line on his face. He was laying himself bare, offering up his own fear and insecurity as a penance. He was giving me all the power. And in that moment, I knew I had a choice. I could retreat back into my fortress, into the safety of my solitude, where no one could hurt me. Or I could take a step into the terrifying, unknown territory he was offering. I thought you regretted it. I whispered, the admission costing me everything. I thought you were disgusted. A look of genuine horror crossed his face. No, God, no, Leo. It was the only thing that's made sense in years, and that was it. That was all I needed to hear. The last of my fear washed away, replaced by a feeling so warm and bright it felt like the sun was rising in my chest. I took the final step that closed the distance between us. I reached out and took his hand. His larger, calloused hand enveloped mine. It felt like coming home. Okay, I said. A watery, relieved smile broke through his exhaustion. Okay, I repeated, squeezing his hand. But if you ever leave a note like that again, I will hunt you down and murder you with a rare manuscript. He laughed, a real, genuine laugh that was quiet and full of relief. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Deal. He didn't let go of my hand. He brought it to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to my knuckles. Can I stay? He asked, his voice small. Just for a bit. I don't want to be alone right now. You can stay as long as you want, I said, and I meant it more than anything I had ever said. He stayed. He showered while I threw away the cold pizza. He emerged from my bathroom wearing a pair of my sweatpants that were far too short on him and one of my t-shirts that was stretched tight across his chest. He looked ridiculous and perfect. He fell asleep on my couch within minutes, a deep, exhausted sleep. I covered him with a blanket and just watched him for a while, this impossible man who had crashed into my quiet life and shattered it into a million beautiful, terrifying pieces. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. I walked into the kitchen to find Caleb, looking much more rested, standing at my counter, pouring hot water into my French press. He was humming softly to himself. The scene was so profoundly domestic, it made my chest ache. He turned and smiled when he saw me. A real smile, one that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. Morning, he said, his voice warm and easy. Morning, I replied, my voice still thick with sleep. He handed me a mug of coffee. Our fingers brushed. This time, there was no jolt of panic, just a pleasant, familiar warmth. I figured I owed you a better morning, he said. He gestured with his head toward the door. I looked. A duffel bag was sitting by the entrance. My heart gave a little squeeze of apprehension. He must have seen the look on my face. Don't worry, he said quickly. I'm not leaving. I just went to my truck this morning. To get some things, he reached into the pocket of his jeans and pulled something out. He held it out to me on his open palm. It was a key, a newly cut, shiny brass key to my apartment. I stared at it, speechless. I had it made yesterday, he admitted, a faint blush on his cheeks. While I was driving around like a lunatic. It was either this or keep driving until I ran out of gas. I figured this was a better bet. He closed his hand around mine, pressing the cool metal into my palm. Just in case, he said softly. In case you want to come back. Or in case you want to be sure I can't get away, a laugh, thick with emotion, escaped me. This man, this supposed paragon of simple confidence, was an overthinking, romantic, insecure mess. He was just like me. We were two sides of the same lonely coin. I closed my fingers around the key. I think, I said, my voice unsteady, that this is a very good bet. The weeks that followed were a quiet revelation. We didn't fall into a whirlwind romance. We fell into something softer, more real. We fell into a rhythm. Caleb would go to work early, the smell of his soap lingering in the bathroom. He'd come home in the evenings, smelling of sawdust and sweat, and he'd sit on the floor of my study, leaning against a bookshelf, and watch me work. He never interrupted. He just seemed to like being there in the quiet with me. We learned each other in small moments. I learned that he hummed when he was concentrating. I learned that he had a sweet tooth that was almost criminal. I learned that his booming laugh was reserved for big groups. But for me, he had a quiet chuckle that was low and intimate. He learned that I couldn't sleep without the window cracked, even in winter. He learned that I organized my spices alphabetically. He learned that behind my quiet exterior, I had a dry, sarcastic wit that only came out when I felt completely safe. My apartment transformed. A pair of his heavy work boots appeared by the door. His toothbrush was next to mine in the bathroom. One of my bookshelves was slowly being taken over by his collection of old woodworking magazines. My fortress of solitude was no longer a fortress. It was a home. The silence was different now. It was a shared silence, comfortable and full. It wasn't the absence of noise. It was the presence of him. One rainy Sunday, I was at my desk, trying to decipher a particularly tricky passage of medieval Latin. Caleb was on the sofa, engrossed in one of my history books, something about ancient siege engines. The only sounds were the rain against the window pane and the soft rustle of turning pages. It was perfect. I looked over at him. He was completely absorbed, his brow furrowed in concentration, his lips moving slightly as he read. This giant, capable man, who built houses and commanded rooms with his presence, was fascinated by trebuchets. A wave of affection so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me washed over me. This was my life now. This quiet, beautiful, impossible life. He must have felt me looking at him, because he glanced up, his eyes meeting mine across the room. He didn't say anything. He just smiled, a slow, gentle smile that was just for me. And in that smile, I saw our future. I saw 1,000 more rainy Sundays, 1,000 more shared silences, 1,000 more quiet moments of perfect, unassuming peace. The party felt like a lifetime ago. The man I had watched from across the room, the bright, distant star, was a stranger to me now. The real Caleb was here on my couch, his feet propped up on my coffee table, reading my books. He hadn't crashed into my world to destroy it. He had come to show me that the walls I had built to keep the world out were also keeping life out. He was the disruption that had led me to myself. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the one that made the whole story make sense. He was the quiet at the end of the noise. And he was home.